happy to be back doing live streams again right here on Oh Yum. I know you fellow bakers love a good recipe, and now that it's September, I really am excited to get baking. I have a delicious appleberry streusel cake recipe to share with you. I bake it in a loaf pan, and I'm doing the entire recipe by hand. Of course, as usual, the full recipe, all the measurements, all instructions are beneath the video screen here. Before I get started on the recipe, I'm so happy to be back, and I want to do my round of hellos to, first of all, hi Esme, hi Lori, mwah, big kisses to you. Hello to Bonnie, hello to my mom, anyone else joining. I know Kathy couldn't make it, but I see tons of names coming up. Just as a note, I'm going to get into the recipe, but I do love getting your baking questions. I will be pausing towards the end or at natural points to take breaks, so I'm not interrupted, and you can see the recipe in full start to finish. So before I get into the batter, I want to make the streusel topping. And if you need a streusel recipe that is good for sprinkling on just about any muffin or loaf cake you wish to make, this is it. It's a keeper. So mixed by hand, I just combine a little bit of all-purpose flour, and I like to mix up doing just 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar and 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. That way it's versatile. It's not too heavy and caramel tasting if it's all brown sugar, or it's not too light and listless if you use all granulated sugar. But this is a light colored streusel cake you probably saw from the thumbnail picture. So the cinnamon flavor is all in the streusel, not in the cake itself. So I add my 2 teaspoons of ground cinnamon, and I don't know, if you're into pumpkin spice, you could replace that with your favorite pumpkin spice blend if you wanted to, which is really essentially a mix of cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, allspice, cloves, all those flavors you find in, say, gingerbread cake or gingerbread cookies, or pumpkin pie, which is why it gets its name. And now that I've just broken up the brown sugar in there, I can take my 60 grams of cool butter. So while I'm using room temperature butter for the cake itself, I'm using cool butter for the streusel. That way I can cut it into pieces, and the streusel doesn't get too lumpy too quickly. You don't want to bring it together too fast. So I'm just using a pastry blender. You could use 2 butter knives or a couple of forks to break it through. If you are making a pie dough by hand, this is really the best tool for you to use if you're doing it by hand. Otherwise, you'd use a stand mixer or a food processor. I see hellos and greetings coming in from everyone. It's so nice to see you back. And while we're back here in our 6 p.m. Ontario time slot now, when I'm back for live streams in October, we're going to try the 12 noon time slot again and bring that back. So hopefully we'll get some of you that couldn't watch live because you have to go to bed and maybe go to work or school the next day. Now you'll be able to join us. So we're going to mix it up a little bit and see what works. But I'm so happy to see all you bakers back again. Fantastic. And now I've still got some, you can still see some visible pieces of butter. So I'm going to work it in just a little bit more. And the butter starts softening up as you work it through. You know what, while I finish working up, I'll take some questions or see where people are writing from. Oh, Sanskriti, hey, welcome back. Sanskriti is asking about bringing ingredients like sour cream or buttermilk up to room temperature. You definitely don't want to put them in the microwave or heat them. They are typically added towards the end of a recipe, and I know you've been paying attention, Sanskriti, because you know I like to blend ingredients of a like temperature together because they blend together, but you don't need to leave your buttermilk sit out for hours and hours. Just pull it out about the same time that you're preheating your oven would be the best. And that way it just warms up a little bit. If you measure it so it's not sitting in its whole container, then you're just bringing up to room temp that amount that you need. I've seen lots of Greetings from Mexico, Brazil, Argentina. We've got the UK, lots from the US. I see you in New Jersey and Ohio. It's fantastic. And we've got lots of people joining. Of course, we have my sweetie, Michael, running the cameras. And he's playing more today. He hooked up a 4th camera. We don't even need the stove cam today. You want to show that angle? Ooh, there. How does that streusel look up close? We've got Michael running the cameras. We've already got over 180 people watching right now. Great. So we're so glad you're back. Okay, in that little chit-chat time, I can see now that you almost see the streusel color intensify a little bit as the moisture from the butter kind of works together with the cinnamon. There we go. And I'm just going to set that aside. Actually, I'll swap it out here because I need my larger bowl for the cake batter itself. If you're just joining me, I'm making an appleberry streusel cake. This is just classic. It's not a pound cake. It's just one of those tea cake style recipes. And I use the more traditional method. When I'm making a cake batter for a layer cake, I use the reverse method. If it's not a whipped egg-based cake, where you sift your dry ingredients, you work in your butter, you add the wet ingredients all at once, and you whip it up. This is more that old school, where you start with your fat and sugar, add your eggs, and then I add my milk in between my additions of flour. So I've got my half a cup, or 115 grams of unsalted butter. I'm just gonna soften it up here. We're having nice hot weather here in September in southern Ontario. Unseasonably, well, I love this weather. If it's unseasonable, it can stay around as long as it wants. And as I mentioned, I add a little brown sugar into the streusel, but I use white sugar in the cake itself to keep it just nice and light and bright. And thank you, Gina, for your kind comments about my cookbooks. I am working on not just 1, but 2 books right now. Now you have to wait. Baking Wisdom is my latest book, and that came out just last year. So it takes over 2 years to write a book. So, but by this time next year, I'll be sharing recipes from the newer cookbook, but I have to keep them under wraps until then. Even though we've done all the work. Recipe development's done. The recipes are typed, the photos have been taken, so now we're working in the edit and design phases of the cookbook. That's why it takes so many people, and a lot of time you have to be very patient when it comes to writing a cookbook. So I'm just creaming the butter and sugar together. You could do this, of course, in a stand mixer, but I figure then you're just looking at the stand mixer this entire video, and I don't get a chance to talk to you and have a nice little visit. So there we go. I can feel now the butter is softening up. The friction of the sugar and butter together against the side of the bowl will help give your cake some nice structure. And now I can add my eggs one at a time. So these I've let sit out to room temperature. So like I said, I think it is a good rule. When you're turning on your oven, that's the first thing you should do when you decide you want to start baking, and you want to give it a good 15 minutes to preheat. That's a good amount of time to pull out your eggs and your butter for a recipe like this. If you're really in a hurry and want to heat those eggs up quickly, you know, you can drop them in a bowl of hot tap water, and in the hot water, they'll warm up very, very easily. Okay, so I've just added my 1 of 2 eggs right now. Everything good on the signal scene and tech-wise? All right. Michael's smiling, so I know things are good. All right, now this first addition of egg really softens up the butter. And it really depends on your recipe. If I was making a pound cake, I'd be using more butter, and this base mixture would be a lot lighter and fluffier, but I have a little less butter because we have the moisture from the fruit that we're adding later. So don't worry if the beginning of your batter seems rather dense and heavy. And now here's something. Have you ever got to the point where you're adding your second, or if the recipe calls for a 3rd egg, that your butter base starts separating on you a little bit? It's very, very common. You haven't done anything wrong. It's just the nature of the ingredients doing what they do. What you can always do, and you do want to fix it. So if you see it happening and it's continuing to get worse, what you can do is measure out your flour from the recipe and just add a couple of tablespoons from that to this base batter, and you'll find it comes together smoothly, so then you can keep adding your eggs or liquid, what have you. And that's why I'm waiting until I add some of the flour before I work in my milk. If I were to add my half a cup of milk, 125 ml right now, the batter would start separating. So I'm going to hold off on that. But the recipe can handle a little bit of vanilla. I was very lucky this summer. What I did with my summer vacation, I was very fortunate to be a part of a big baking trade show in Mexico City called Mexipan, where I hosted cooking demos and classes. But I also know that Mexico has some of the best vanilla out there. So that is what I brought as my souvenir home, was a giant 1 liter bottle of just the most delicious vanilla I have ever had. Okay, now it's time for the dry ingredients, which I'd like to sift in. And as I mentioned, I'm going to sift half of them in to work them in. So I've measured out my flour, and I'll sift half of it. I can add my salt and my baking powder at this point. Give it a chance to work in. And just so I don't forget, I'm going to add my little bit of nutmeg. I like adding nutmeg in a cake recipe. If there's not a citrus angle to compete with it, you could add a little lemon zest to this recipe if you wanted. It would be really nice with the apples and raspberries I'm going to add. But if you don't have the citrus zest, I like to use a bit of nutmeg. It rounds out the flavors, kind of the way vanilla does. And it really adds a lot to the recipe. And so now I'm just going to gently stir this at first. Ooh, I can smell that nutmeg. And I don't really need to fully combine. I want to see most of the flour gone. I don't worry about the flour on the sides at this point. There we go. So it's a nice smooth batter. I've got one little piece of butter there. That was stuck on my spatula. There we go. And now I'm going to add the milk. Because it's such a small measurement of milk, it's not like I have to add a couple tablespoons and then a little more flour and go back and forth. I can just add the milk all at once. And now this will really soften up the batter. I'll take my time. You won't need to switch to a whisk though. Oh, I just caught a note from KS about American buttercream versus ermine buttercream, which is our delicious buttercream. Type of buttercream. Ermine buttercream is when you actually cook milk and thicken it with flour. And so you make this paste and a little bit of sugar so that when you add the butter and sugar into this cooled paste, it's not as sweet and it has this beautiful velvety, sometimes it's called a velvet buttercream, velvety consistency. And I'm thinking now, I have a recipe for ermine buttercream. Have I actually made it for you on Oh Yum? I think now I know of something I'm going to add to my to-do list for future live streams. It is spectacular. If you've ever enjoyed a whoopie pie, the soft cake cookies sandwich with the frosting, the traditional frosting is actually not a marshmallow frosting. It's the ermine frosting. Okay, now I'll finish sifting in the flour. And I will, oh, we've got some love for ermine frosting all around. And Swiss buttercream. If I'm not doing an ermine frosting, I do love a good Swiss buttercream too. And Joelle, oh, nice question. Just while I'm stirring, I can take a few questions. I see Joelle is asking if you can use blackberries in this recipe, because I call for cranberries or raspberries. I like the red. Oh, blackberries are in season right now, and I would definitely recommend blackberries, especially with the apple. We're at that beautiful point here in Southern Ontario where our summer season is winding down, but you can still buy peaches, you can still buy blackberries and blueberries and tomatoes and corn, but now our apples and pears and plums and squash have started. It's just a wonderful time to be creative as a cook and a baker here. So do get adventurous. And you can use frozen fruit if you want, because cranberries have a very limited season. Usually later in fall and into winter, but they freeze very well too. So for fragile berries like raspberries, I like to use them frozen. If I'm using frozen berry, right from the freezer into my batter, because they will thaw by the time they get to the oven. Where something like a cranberry, once it's frozen, is pretty rock hard, doesn't let out a lot of excess juice. So you can let those thaw a little bit before you fold them into your batter. So here it is, a nice, simple, tasty cake batter. And do, like I said, get creative with your fruits. So I've got my tart cooking apple. When I bake with apples, I like a tart apple. Honeycrisp are very popular here. Granny Smith, I think, is available around the world. So if you have a comparable apple to a Granny Smith, I recommend using it. In France, in the UK, it might be a completely different variety, but you know what works. Around here, when cause apple pie season is starting, we get apples like Spy and Spartan that are super tart and they're perfect for baking. So it's a medium apple, which adds up to about a cup by volume. And I dice it around the same size as the comparable fruit I'm adding, in this case, fresh raspberries. And a raspberry leaf. And I'm just going to gently stir this. If you're going to use pear in place of the apple, keep in mind you're lacking the acidity that apple has, so you want your complementary fruit to be really tart. So that's where a fruit like cranberry really comes into play. If it's springtime, rhubarb would be fantastic. And rhubarb and apple is a great combination. All right, guys, we've got, Michael, we've got a lot of people still hot on buttercream. It's a big topic. I think I'm gonna have to do a whole buttercream episode. Oh yes, an ermine frosting with a red velvet cake. Oh yeah, that would be definitely very good. Oh, and we've got people who are from New Zealand, but they're on vacation in Japan and joining us. So welcome. Thank you for taking a little time. There we go. So I don't want to...
Morning or evening there?
Oh, that's a good question. Is it morning or evening in Japan right now? Please, I'll keep an eye and see if you want to reply. I don't want to overstir now that I've got those fragile raspberries in there. You can use a traditional 9x5 loaf pan if you want. This one is a little longer and more narrow. The volume that counts is 2 liters. So as long as it can hold 2 liters, be aware that your bake time might change a little bit. If this one I find with this pan, because it's taller, so the volume is higher in the pan, the cake can take about an extra 10 minutes to bake, where a 9x5 pan is a little wider and lower, so the cake itself is shorter, takes slightly less time. And I've preheated my oven to 350. So in goes the batter. This was really quick. I haven't done a live stream in a couple of months. I wasn't sure if it was going to take me longer or shorter, but I've been baking a lot this summer. A lot of recipe work. Just a little leveling, but you don't have to spread it too much. It will melt and find where it belongs in the big picture of streusel cake world. And now I'm just going to take a second. Now that the butter's softened up a little more, and just work that streusel a bit more. So if you want to double up on this streusel recipe, you could put it in a jar or a airtight container and keep it in the fridge, and it will keep indefinitely because it is just dry ingredients. There's no egg or leavening to compromise. And then you have it on hand to sprinkle wherever you want to use it. And this is a lot of streusel for a single cake. But I love having that crunchy layer. It kind of crackles and cracks on top as it bakes, and the cake lifts up a little bit. Because the cake is so simple. So I press it down just slightly, just so that as it bakes, it stays in place. There we go. And so if you're making a banana bread takes 60 to 75 minutes in a 350 oven. So does this. And you want to use a skewer and test the cake. And you want to test it in a few places because there's so much fruit in there. So I test in the center. You lift the skewer out. When it comes out clean of any crumbs, you might have some raspberry juice on there, but so long as you see there's no wet batter or heavy crumbs, then you know the cake. But I usually like to really get in there in one or two places to make sure it's properly done. So I'll pop this in the oven. And I think now is a perfect time to take some questions as I bring the beautiful one already done. I know, shall I move this, Michael, for you? Would that be easier? No? Okay, good. So you can see what I mean about the top of the streusel. It really sticks on and it smells divine when it's baking. That combination of the cinnamon on top, but then you get the hints of the apple with the raspberry and the nutmeg in that simple cake. You do want to let it cool almost to room temperature if you can wait that long before you slice, and it does take a while to cool. And typical with most cakes, what I like to do is cool it on a rack first in the pan for 15 minutes. That allows everything to kind of settle in place. And I use you saw my loaf pan had the parchment with the sides longer than the height of the pan. That way it's easier to lift out to continue cooling on the rack. Because this takes so long to cool and you've got all that fruit in there, if you leave it in the pan to cool, you can get condensation and you'll lose that sort of nice, it's not a tough crust at all, but you want that little bit of a pull on the outside of your cake. So now I'm going to cut into it. And Bonnie knows I'm coming by. And look at that beautiful thick streusel layer. Just crumbling out to you, inviting you to take a bite. This loaf freezes well and it transports well, so if you need to bring it to someone's house, it's a handy little treat to have. I think I talk about it, how it makes a great host gift. Yeah, that streusel makes it almost like a muffin top. And then that balance of the raspberries. If you use cranberries, you get that bright pop of bright red color. And it's not crumbly at all. Because you've got the fruit in there, it's nice and moist. Joelle is asking a question that I would like to come back with an answer for because it's a very good question. Joelle, you're asking, you use an instant read thermometer to check the doneness of the cake. That is so prudent and will guarantee a consistent result, and I can't tell you at this moment what temperature you should read. So I will look that up and I will come back on the thread and add that note because that is an excellent question. Thank you for that. And Kayas is asking about this Pullman style, the longer loaf pan that I used with the straight. I love the precision you get of the straight sides and corners. This loaf pan is 10 inches long by 4.5 inches wide, so it holds the same volume as a 9x5 loaf pan. If that's any guidance in terms of, I see you were asking the batter volume. And I can't say, oh, well, if it fills up 2/3 of the way, you know you're fine, because it really does depend on the recipe. Some double in size and some almost stay put. Like a pound cake doesn't actually lift a whole lot. That's another very good question. This is what I love about you. You know, here on Oh Yum, we've cracked 1.5 million subscribers. So thank you to you for being such fans. And you are such astute bakers. And I can see that by the questions you do ask me, the sincere interest, the really good base of knowledge you already have. If you're new to the channel, you've got lots to check out. I could keep you distracted for a long time if you're supposed to be studying or at work because we've got I think it's over 700 videos here on the channel. And we are producing more. I'm very excited to say that in just a couple of weeks, we'll be launching a brand new taped series. It's got 2 different styles. We've got some culinary travel adventures to share with you. And of course, I'm right here cooking recipes from around the world. So I see that you're watching from everywhere. And so I'm sharing all sorts of different recipes. And I can't wait to share those new series with you. But in the meantime, you are going to be right back here, same time next week, because I will be making, should I tell everyone?
Nope.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, you deserve to know because you've stayed through to watch all the way to the end. I will be making chocolate zucchini muffins. I'm in the mood for all these cozy, comforting bakes, I think because it's September. And if you grow zucchini, you know that one plant yields a lot of zucchini and you're trying to sneak zucchini in everything. Well, these chocolate zucchini muffins are really something else. A recipe I've been working on for a while. I'm very proud of it. You'll see. There's nothing like it on the channel, so I'm happy to share it with you. Your comments and notes are fantastic. I thank you for your kind words, your interest, your intriguing questions. You bakers are the best. And now you've got a new recipe you can give a try to, my appleberry streusel cake. I wish you all the best, and I'll see you in a week. And Bonnie, I'll see you in about 5 minutes. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Mm-hmm.